Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Nothing But Dicta, the podcast of only opinions and no facts. I'm your host, Andrew Tuvlin, and today I have two very special guests for you, and they are here to talk about the summer 1L job search. Shloke, Rithu, would you guys mind introducing yourselves?
Yes, hi. Thank you, Andrew. Happy to be here. My name is Shloke Nair. I am a 2L, and I'm happy to be here. My job during 1L summer was working at Baker Botts, a firm that is located in DC in their antitrust group.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rithu. I'm also equally happy to be here. Thanks, Andrew. And my 1L summer, I worked at a nonprofit organization called Ayuda, which serves immigrants under the poverty line in DC in litigation representation.
And this summer, I worked in-house at a firm called Intelsat, where we did satellite regulation. So the reason I chose these two to be my guests today is because now we have a full panel of anything you could possibly want to do this summer. So let's get into the first question of how did you actually find your job?
Yeah, so for me, I thought, throughout the year that I wanted to try to apply to a 1L summer diversity position at a firm. So, I was thinking along the lines of a firm would be good for me. I want to see what happens. So I pretty much applied pretty widely around the winter break time to a bunch of firms in DC. I knew I also wanted to try to stay in DC if that was possible. So applied to a lot of firms in DC, filled out those applications. And eventually I got offers for screeners and then eventually callbacks. And I ended up getting a position with Baker Botts, which I really enjoyed. So for me, it was more of like an iterative application experience, interviewing, just kind of a more, firm-based and company-based recruitment process.
And then I wasn't as clear during my 1L year exactly where I wanted to end up. I knew I was interested in public interest and public service, but I wasn't really clear on what a 1L internship in that sphere would look like. There is obviously a lot of different options, and so I explored a little bit the government route. I ended up going to a lot of information sessions that the public interest team at GW put on, and started narrowing down that I wanted to work at a nonprofit organization. So starting with PSRP in the very early parts of spring semester, I started applying to a bunch of organizations, and that was kind of a very long process, and eventually started hearing back mid-spring and was interviewing and then settled on Ayuda because I loved the work that they did.
This might come as a surprise, but I actually got my job through networking. So for everyone who tells you that networking is, brutal or that it's not worth it, I 100% got my job through networking. Someone in my network reached out to me and said, my company is hiring. Are you interested in applying for the position? So then I applied for the position, ended up falling in love with it, doing it for the summer. So that's definitely a piece of advice, is that networking does work. I highly encourage you to do it. Worst case scenario is you just meet some people. Best case scenario is you will get a job from it. Another thing that I know that a lot of 1Ls worry about and that there's not much information on is timeline. So could you quickly talk about what the recommended timeline would be for getting your summer positions?
Yeah, so for me, applying to firms, I think time is kind of the essence with those types of positions, just because they tend to be competitive, especially depending on the geographic region that you're seeking out. So for me, I think I had mentioned that I started applying around winter break, but that by no means that, that's the latest by which you can apply. So I started applying around that time. I definitely carried that into January, so around now. But the thing is, once you kind of submit your applications, what I kind of learned from the firm process is that the turnaround is really quick. So you submit your applications, and then, a couple weeks later, you get reached out to for a screener, which is approximately 15 to 20 minutes. After your screener, they probably, usually tell you within 3 or 4 days whether they would like to invite you for a callback. So, that happens 3 or 4 days, maybe a week after. You have your callback, which is a longer 2-hour interview with more of a panel of partners and associates. And then after the callback, it takes around a week, I would say, to hear back on whether you got an offer or not. So that's all to say that, once you submit your application, the process and the timeline can be pretty tight and the turnaround is quick. I think for me, I ended up accepting a position by the beginning or middle of February. So all in all, from beginning to end, the process was pretty quick. It took about 1.5 or 2 months for me. So that's how my experience was.
My experience was a bit different. I think that firms definitely seem to stick to more of a strict timeline with recruiting. On the other hand, I think a lot of public service organizations and government organizations aren't as clear on exactly how many interns they need or what they're looking for well into the spring semester. A lot of jobs were opening up in public interest at sort of random times. So my process started probably around the same time as Shloke's, but was definitely a little bit longer. And one thing I just really want to emphasize is everyone's timeline is going to look different. It is helpful to look at what other people did who came before you and what sort of their timeline looked like, but don't feel any pressure if your timeline doesn't align with that perfectly. Things are always moving around and opportunities are always opening up, so don't get discouraged if you feel like you've been in this process for a long time without getting the results you want, because it is kind of like an endurance game, so it will eventually all work out.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said, Rithu, and I'm kind of upset you said it because I was going to say that. So you really stole my thunder there. But for in-house, it really depends on the company. Some will do a complete quick turnaround within a couple weeks. Some will drag out the process for months. It really just depends on each individual company. For me, I had a very positive experience. They were very active in keeping me updated, and the whole process for me took about 3 weeks. But like you mentioned with the timelines, it is very stressful. No one is going to deny that looking for a job is stressful. It's not fun. It takes up a lot of time. But everyone's timeline is different, and as long as you work hard, it will work out. I actually got my internship, I think it was maybe 1 to 2 weeks before finals. So I didn't have my summer internship lined up until very late into the semester. So obviously that was causing me a lot of stress and it wasn't fun to deal with, but that's to say that it does work out for everyone as long as you stay diligent. And so that kind of leads me into the next question, which Rithu, if you choose to be exempted from, you may, but it's what advice would you give to 1Ls in the process right now?
Yeah, I would say obviously, I've been speaking a little bit more to the firm experience, but I think more generally, apply broadly. I didn't just apply to firms. Obviously, I emphasize that a little bit more, but I did apply to some government positions. I did apply in-house. So I think the key there is really that any work experience that you can get 1L is really helpful for you down the line. And to the extent that, you might be wanting to work in big law down the line, I can confidently tell you that if you don't get a big law job 1L, there are many, many people that end up getting them 2L. It is not at all a prerequisite for getting a big law job during OCI. So try not to let that be the be all end all. And the last thing I would say is probably just kind of explore all avenues in terms of your interests. Don't restrict yourself to maybe one type of law or, something that you came into law school thinking. I know for me personally, I came into law school thinking a couple things in terms of what I was interested in, and that's definitely shifted. So keep your options open, both in terms of what types of jobs you're applying to, but also like the kinds of law that you're going to explore and what you're going to learn. And as long as you do that, as Andrew said, very inspiringly, it will work out for you.
Thank you for the offer, Andrew, but I won't exempt myself from this question. I want to go back to what Shloke said about not pressuring yourself if you don't get the exact job you want this summer, that, your future in big law or your future in whatever it is you want to practice is over. That is definitely like the number one mental hurdle, I think, for a lot of people, is putting that amount of pressure on this first job. And it makes sense. We do hear a lot about how important 1L summer is, and it is, but there's always multiple paths to end up at the destination that you want to. Like, you will be able to be whatever kind of lawyer you want, regardless of how this summer goes. And it really helped me to sort of alleviate some of that pressure while I was searching, made the work a little bit easier. Another thing is, make sure you are really exploring your interests. Like Shloke said, there is a whole world of law practice out there that you really don't find out about until you sort of dive into it, and can really be interesting to you. So really don't limit yourself. Apply broadly, apply confidently. The worst that can happen is you don't get it, but really restricting yourself beforehand and not even applying because of whatever concerns you have is probably the worst thing you can do for yourself. So really just have almost like unearned confidence, I feel like, in this process, and it'll work out.
One thing that I would say, maybe not as positive, but just as important, is don't compare yourself to others. It really is hard to be in law school, which is an inherently competitive environment. It is tough when a lot of people are applying for the same positions and want the same things. It can be very stressful to see your classmates and peers get internships when you are still looking. The number one thing to remember, like Rithu and Shloke both said earlier, is that everyone has their own path, and that it will only stress you out to compare yourself to other people. What I found from my experience was that everyone was very kind. No one looks down on anyone else. Everyone's very supportive of each other. And once some of my friends got internships and I hadn't gotten them yet, a couple of my friends would send me job applications that they saw that they thought looked interesting. So, don't compare yourself to others, but definitely rely on your friends. That's kind of a whole message for law school in general as well. But do not be afraid to use your support system. That's what it's there for. So I think another thing that is really important for 1Ls to know is, professional experiences and how to look professional. So what is one thing you picked up during your summer that you think would have been helpful 1L year professionally, if that makes sense? One example off the top would be maybe you got some really good resume advice over the summer, or maybe they gave you a really good tip on business presentations, something along those lines.
Yeah, I think for me that looked like a lot of positions require in some form like a personal statement if you're applying for, diversity positions at firms, or even more broadly cover letters. I think for me, just kind of attending, the cover letter workshops that the Career Center puts on, I have always found cover letters to be super annoying, and I never quite knew how to handle them. But I think the key that I personally learned is that a cover letter does not have to be long. It does not have to be super detailed. In fact, a lot of the guidance that you'll look at says they shouldn't be more than maybe half to 3/4 maximum of a page. And they don't have to be incredibly detailed. And this might go against some of the advice that you've heard, but I think there is efficiency in kind of repeating some similar language between cover letters. Obviously, you want to make sure that you substitute out the company name and whatnot. But I think just kind of understanding how you can economize your time throughout the experience, so that you're not, breaking your back trying to come up with the most specialized cover letters or statements for every single place you're applying, will save you time, it'll save you mental strain, and ultimately I think it pays off, because I don't think that those, are things that you need to spend a whole lot of time on. So I guess my overall takeaway is just kind of, understanding how to maximize your time, especially when it comes to documents like cover letters and statements that you might have to write for more than one firm.
Mine is sort of unconventional. The majority of my summer was spent accompanying my supervising attorney to court for different hearings and proceedings. And a big part of going to court and sort of being a lawyer that I learned from that was really the presentation of yourself as a representative of your client, of your firm, whatever it is. So even physically, like beyond clothes, etc., making sure you have composure, making sure you're holding yourself as though you are standing in front of an officer of the law, which is what you are doing, and arguing your case, making sure all of your papers are together and you don't look haggard or like you just got off the metro, something like that. All of these things are sort of really important details that we're not used to so much thinking of as equally as important to being prepared for whatever you're arguing that day in court. I think the way that you come off really does half the work of pleading your case. So making sure you present professionally.
Well, I think that's all the time we have today. Rithu and Shloke, thank you so much for coming on Nothing But Dicta. I definitely appreciate it. I know all the listeners are going to appreciate it. To all of the 1L listeners out there, stay calm. Don't worry, but stay persistent. It is hard work, but all of you can do it. Thanks for listening to Nothing But Dicta, and I'll see you in the next episode.